Hey, welcome to the Dev Days conference. We are in Hall 1, Languages and Frameworks, with our next speaker, Simon. Now, when I looked at this topic, it said, what happened to full stack development? Long live full stack development. And especially my background coming in as a C Sharp and .NET person. And I look at Simon, here he is with Java. And are we going to start off a new war? But no, in the end, I've just realized over the years, your clients have different needs, your clients come with different ecosystems, and you do what is right. But then when you have .NET and Java, and then you have new platforms like React and Angular, what do all the .NET and the Java developers do? Do we need to move to the new platform, or there is still hope for us? And I'm hoping that Simon is going to prove us all wrong and tell us there is something to this. So, Simon, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Yeah, my talk is about full stack development. And first of all, I like to introduce myself a bit more. I'm very much into the Java ecosystem. So I'm a Java champion, a Vaadin champion, an Oracle Ace for Java. And I'm also active at the Java user group in Switzerland. I'm active in the Java community process. And I'm a freelance developer in Switzerland, mainly with Java. And I'm also teaching at two universities in Switzerland. So first of all, let's go back in history. When I started with software development, we had something like that. We had client server. Usually the client was directly talking with the server or with the database. And mainly everything was written in one language. And we had something like that. It's called layered architecture. So we tried to separate presentation, business, and persistence layer. And especially in the Java space, we had something called J2E. This was later named Java E. Now we call it Jakarta E. And there we also have the layers. So that means we have a client machine and we have a so-called Java E application server, where we have two containers, a web container and an EJB container. And web container usually was serving static pages created by Java server pages or servlets, and the web browser just displayed that. So there was no interaction with the client machine. But on the other hand, we had something called the application client container. That means we had a rich client or a fat client or a thin client, depending on how much logic the client had. But this was also written in Java Swing or AWT or Eclipse RCP. And that led to many Java UI frameworks. So on the left-hand side, we have frameworks for rich client development. And on the right-hand side, we have Struts, JSF, Apache Wicked, Thymeleaf, or Vaadin, which are Java web frameworks. And there are many more. So not only these, but these are probably the most popular that are still used. Now, the time moved on, and suddenly we had an architecture like that. I call that history repeats, but because what do we have now? We have client-server applications. That means we have on the client side frameworks like React, Angular, or Vue, or many more other frameworks in the JavaScript space, where you develop applications as so-called single-page applications. And then on the right-hand side, you have the server. You have to create an API. This is usually a RESTful API where you have HTTP communication and send JSON back and forth through the API. Then you have the server logic and the database. Now, this separation of client and server gives us some issues. For example, we have to manage tool build and deployments. So because we are in two separate ecosystems, so on the server side, we are, in my case, on the Java space, we usually have Spring Boot, Quarkus, or Micronaut as the framework on the server. And on the client side, we have all this JavaScript or TypeScript stuff, where we have a separate build system with NPM and on the server we have Maven or Gradle, so we have to learn both. Depending on the size of the team, this may be okay, because if you have a huge team and you have a strict separation between front-end development and back-end development, this is perfectly fine. But imagine you have a smaller team where everybody in the team must know both worlds, then it may become a bit harder. On the other hand, the question is, how does the client access the API? So if we do a REST API, do we want to create an open API specification and generate the client code? Or do we have GraphQL, for example, as the API? How do we access the backend in that case? And finally, there's a third issue. So we have to validate the user input, but where do we do that? And if we do it on the client and the server side, how we keep this validation consistent. So if we avoid, how do we avoid that the client is validating something that is not validated on the server, or vice versa? Now, these are all problems that arise from client-server communication, again, with all these single-page application frameworks. But there are some alternatives, and I call these alternatives the Simon selection. These are full-stack web frameworks for Java developers. And let's directly go to the selection. Let's start on the left-hand side. Maybe you already have heard of htmx. htmx is a tiny library that allows you to add interactivity to statically rendered htmx or HTML pages. So we will see that in the demo later on. But the idea is you have a server-side rendered web application. So usually this is called like a controller, and this controller then renders a template, and the template will contain just HTML. And then you can add HTMX and make it more interactive. Then we have two other frameworks. We have in the middle Vaadin. Vaadin is also a full stack web application framework. It was created initially over 20 years ago, but 5 years ago it had a major overhaul, and Vaadin Flow is now technically based on web components, and you have something in the browser that is communicating with the server, but you write your entire UI logic and your code is just in Java, and Vaadin Flow handles the communication between the client and servers. So as a Java developer, I don't have to learn JavaScript to make interactive applications. This will be handled by Vaadin Flow. And the last framework is called Hilla. Hilla is kind of different from the other two because this is a custom single page application that you create with React or Lit. Lit is a framework to create web components, but can also be used as an application framework. And there you have classical endpoints, but not RESTful. We will see that in a minute. We have kind of a real client-server communication, but you don't have to care about that. The difference between the first two and the last two is that with Hilla, you have to write your client code in TypeScript. So let's move to the bit deeper comparison. So we see that on the programming model side, we have different approaches. With Thymeleaf, we create HTML templates. We add dynamic with htmx. With Vaadin, we are fully on the Java side. And with Hilla, we have a TypeScript, Lit, or React front end with the Java backend. If you look at the skill level, we see that in most cases, we just need to know Java. For sure, we need some CSS knowledge to make the styling. And in case of the Thymeleaf templates, we need also to know HTML. And only on the Hilla side, we need TypeScript and JavaScript knowledge. But this is somehow limited and could be easily approached by Java developers. Then something that is different between these three approaches is that with Thymeleaf, you just have HTML. For sure, you can use something like Tailwind CSS to have nice looking templates for your components, but you don't have really a component model. But with Vaadin, Vaadin provides a rich web component model with default themes that you can extend or change to your needs. And because these are web components, you can more or less integrate all web components that are out there. Plus, Vaadin has third-party component directory with around 2,000 components where you can choose from. But when we go to the build ecosystem, we see we can use main or Gradle with all three, but we don't have to use NPM. So NPM is in brackets because Vaadin and Hilla will use NPM to build the front-end code, but you don't have to care about that. Then the last thing that I want to talk about is state. With Thymeleaf, you can have state because you're using Spring Boot. You could have session state if you like to. With Hilla, you have no state because it's classical, like a single-page application architecture. But with Vaadin, you would have server state because the component tree is held on the server, and Vaadin Flow will communicate with the server and exchange data there. So that's how these frameworks differ from each other. But the best way to get into the frameworks for sure is to have a look at it. So I would like to start with Vaadin because maybe this is something new for most Java developers. By the way, there is a demo project. I will provide the link to the GitHub repository later. And there we have the same application done with Vaadin, Thymeleaf, and Hilla. So maybe first I start the Vaadin application that we can see how this looks like. Here we have the application, and let's make it a bit bigger. So we can see we have an input field where we can enter some name, for example, then say hello, and then we will display a notification. That's one part of the application, and the other part of the application is we have a master detail view with a grid and an editor on the side, and we, for example, can change the name, save it, and it will immediately be changed here. So that's a typical, what I call business application with a lot of data, with tables, with forms. So it's kind of a data-centric application, and that's something that you usually do. Now, if you want to do such application with the single-page application framework, you have a lot of work because, first of all, you have to create server side, then you provide a REST API, you have to test the REST API and the server, and finally you have to write the client code and test it. And if you look at the Vaadin code, we can see two views. Let's start with the simpler one. We have a hello world view, and as you can see, this is all plain Java code. Let's make it a bit bigger for you, like that. So we have an annotation called route. The route annotation is used to have a URL for the view. So this is hello, or we can have also an alias, so it will be on the context root. Then we create a class that extends from something, and that something is in that case a horizontal layout. So Vaadin comes with vertical, horizontal, form layout, split layout, and so on, and you can use that. And this is kind of HTML template. And then you go ahead and create a text field, a button with a click listener. You add the text field and the button. Then you can have some styling. Like here, we say that the vertical component alignment should be by the end, and that's it. So that's all that you need to do, and then you're done. Now let's have a look at the grid. The grid is a bit more complicated, but still here you have the route. You extend this time from a div, and then we create the split layout. And in the split layout, we create the grid. The grid is, you can add columns. Then we can set the items. And the great thing about the grid is it's very simple. So the grid here has a type. It's from person. Person is a regular entity in that case. That's just for simplicity, but usually you would prefer to use a DTO that just contains the data you want to display. But here you also have a direct data binding. So what we specify here when we create the columns is just the name of the property. And finally, if we set the data with set items, you see here I provide a lambda, and the lambda gets a query. And the query is of type Vaadin query and contains, for example, the page and the page size and the sort. That means our grid is fully pageable without doing anything. So we have like, if I scroll down, we may see it exactly. So there was like the reload of the second page. So we have paging automatically. We don't have to care about that. We also have integrated sorting. So I can click on the headers, for example, to sort that. And this will all get into this set items method with the query. And we have also Vaadin Spring Data Helper here because it's very common to use Vaadin with Spring Boot. That's the default choice of the backend framework. And that's why we have a helper here to create out of the Vaadin query a sort object for Spring Data. And then we want to see what's happened when we click on a row. So as you've seen before, we can click here and the form will be filled with the data. So here we just have a value change list and on the select event, and then we navigate here to the same view, but we provide the ID. That means if you click here, as you can see on top, the URL changes. So this is also bookmarkable. And then when navigating to here, we can go to the before enter. And here we parse the route parameter, take it out as a person ID, then fetch the person from the backend and populate the form. And populating the form is very easy. We have a concept of data binding. So there's a binder class where we can read the bean and it will populate the form. And we can also write the bean, then we get back the data from the form into our object. And finally, the form, as we can see here, consists of a form layout with the text fields, a date picker, and the checkbox. So finally, we can do everything in Java. We have no need to write a single line of JavaScript code. But the interesting thing about Vaadin is the runtime. So if we have a look at the tools, for example, and have a look at the elements. So let's zoom a bit. Sorry, make it a bit bigger. And then we see that if we look at the body, we see a outlet element. So that's like a single page application by the end, where you also have this kind of shell. And if we go down there, we can see that we have, we have a flow container, then we have a layout, and somewhere down there we have our content, and we see that we have a grid, for example, with the cells, and everything is there. And as you can see, all the components have a Vaadin prefix. That means these are web components, and web components need to have a dash in it with as a prefix to distinguish it from normal HTML component. And that's finally how Vaadin works with the web components. Now, this is Vaadin, where you have fully Java application. So let's move to Hilla before we go to the last one. Hilla has more or less the same components, but the difference is we have not JavaScript, Java backend, we do JavaScript or TypeScript in the front end. But what Hilla is helping us is you don't have to care about the validation, you don't have to care about client-server communication, and you don't have to worry about that build. Because if we have a look at the POM file, we see that we have a Spring Boot parent and we have a Hilla dependency and the Hilla Spring Boot starter. And this will do everything for us. We also have a Hilla plugin down here. And this Hilla plugin will then finally generate the bundle that we want to deliver. So also Vaadin and Hilla both have like a dev time environment and the production build. So the production build minimizes the bundle that will be delivered, but with both application frameworks, you finally get the jar file that you have to install. So you don't get a separate front end and separate backend bundle. You just get one, and you can, for example, put that in a container and then you run it on any container orchestration solution, for example. So let's have a look at the endpoints. We still have the same services and entities as we had before, but the difference is we now have a Hello World endpoint and person endpoint. So let's have a look at the Hello endpoint first. This one is annotated with endpoint. Endpoint is an annotation from Hilla, and we have an anonymous allowed annotation that allows you to call the endpoint, because by default, all endpoints in Hilla are secure. So you need to log in to get access to it. But as we don't have security in place, we have to add the anonymous allowed, and everybody can call, say hello. But the difference here to a single page application is we don't have a REST API. So we really have, like we had back in the days, an RPC, so remote procedure call API we can call say hello. We have some annotations here. For example, we can tell Hilla that say hello will always return a string and never null. And we also can tell that the name in the parameter list must always be not null. Otherwise, we will have an error here. And this is not only used for the communication, this is also used because Hilla will generate client access code from these endpoints. Now, let's go ahead to the front-end code. Here we have the Hello World view, and in that case, it's lit. Today, we usually use React because React is much more popular, but I let the demo with lit because, in my opinion, it's easier to understand, at least for the demo here. And what we see here, we have something called a custom element. So this is a web component that will be created from my Hello World view. This extends Vue from Hilla. And finally, we have like the connector callback that is called if the component is attached to the DOM. And then we have a render method with an HTML template where we use a text field and a button. And these two components are exact the same components that we had in the Vaadin application. So if you know Vaadin and Vaadin text field, a Vaadin button, you also know how to use it directly here in Hilla. So this could be an easier way to learn that if you already know Vaadin. And we also have change event. For example, here we set the name of our component to the current value. And then, as you can see here, we call say hello on the server side. And what we get here is a hello world endpoint. That means Vaadin is Hilla is creating from our endpoint on the server a hello world endpoint class here on the client side that we can use to access the server. That means we just call say hello and get the string back and can display the notification. That means, as you can see, there is absolutely no client-server communication involved for us, so you don't have to call any HTTP clients or stuff like that, just use the Hello World endpoint. And on the other hand, we have the master detail view. This one is a bit more complicated because we have the grid here with the columns, and we also have an editor with the form layout, and here we have data binding. So it is dollar, curly brackets, field, style, we can bind to a model. And the model means that we have on the server side the person entity. And based on that, because this is used on the person endpoint, so we're sending here back a list of person, then we can also bind that directly to our text fields or date pickers or checkboxes or whatever components we have where we can use data binding. And the binder here is more or less the same binder as we had on the server side, with a slightly difference because we get the person model generated, and the person model is like a metadata of our backend person model. And with that, all the modification, and not the modification, the verification can be done. So we have validation on if the field is null or not, or if it's an email or stuff like that. And this is based, everything's based on, let's see, on the person. And the person here has, for example, an email annotation and non-null annotations. So the email annotation is an annotation from Jakarta validation. You can use all the Jakarta validation constraints, and this will also be checked on the client side without the need that you have to do it yourself. So if we start the Hilla application, we see kind of a difference to the Vaadin application. So here it says that it has a front-end build, and now we are here on the same application, and we can call that, and we see it also renders hello notification with the name that we entered there. So in terms of architecture, the Vaadin application is kind of different because there you have something like a synchronization from the client to the server. The state is on the server, whereas Hilla is a full single-page application framework with React, or in my case with Lit, and you get the communication to the server for free, and you also get the validation, the same validation on the back end and the front end, and you don't have to care about the build because everything runs in one application, and npm plugin, or the plugin uses npm to build the application. Now moving back to Vaadin, let's have a look at what really happens, because this is quite interesting from an architecture point of view. So let's go to the network view, and let's clear that for that we just get one request. And now let's make that bigger that you can see it. So we have network, and that's because I clicked there. So let's enter test and click hello. Now you can see some requests, and let's check which one was the first one. You can see that's a sync request. Then we take that one, and here we see that we clicked on the say hello button. So this will create a call to the server, and it will return more or less what in flow, so the server-side component has to do. And here we see that we have a Vaadin notification, and here we also see a node with hello test. So that means if we click here, hello test, this JSON structure will be returned from the server and will rendered for you in the client. So that's the architecture of Vaadin. And if we look at Hilla and do the same, so let's check out also here what's happened if we click on the say hello button. Here we see that we call say hello as a URL, and it returns hello test. So this is like a regular RPC style interface where we just call a method. So here we call say hello, for example, with the request, and in the request we somehow have the hello inside, and the response will then return hello test. So these are the differences. By the way, with the newest version of Vaadin that is coming soon, Vaadin 24.4, there we can mix both applications. So because Vaadin has server state, so that means it's not offline capable, But if you want to add offline capable views to your application, you can mix them and say, okay, we create our application with Vaadin. And if you have something that must also work, if the client has no internet connection, we can add it with React, for example, have a local store and get it from there. So, and the last one that I like to show you is more a different ID. We have Thymeleaf. It really doesn't matter which kind of template that we are using, but here we can see that I use Thymeleaf for that. It's a HTML template where we have some input field and also the button. So let's start that as well. And we have it here. So this looks a bit different because we don't have the Vaadin components. I use Bootstrap here just to have kind of a layout. And here I can say hello, and it renders the message. And if you have a look at it clearly, then you see that it just changed the text above below. And this is done with the framework called htmx. htmx is used to change only parts of the application or of the template. And this can be done like so that we have new attributes on the components. They all have the prefix hx for htmx, and here we have a post. This means that htmx will do a post for that. And then we have a target here where we can say, okay, the response of the post request will be target to the greeting element. And the greeting element in my case is this fragment here. And then it will be replaced by htmx. So that means we are doing not a REST API call with JSON that's coming back and having a JavaScript that is using that JSON to re-render parts of the page. We just send back the fragment. So if we have a look at the hello controller, we see that we have the regular get mapping to get back the page, and then we have this post mapping greet, but this time it's an HX request. It's by Wim de Blauwe. It's an addition for Spring Boot, where you can use that. And then we get the model attribute, the name, and then we can render just a fragment. So we just render this greeting fragment. And so we really get HTML back from the server. And if we have a look at that as well in the web inspector, let's clear that and say test again and say hello. Then we see that we get the hello request, but the response here is finally everything that we have inside this div. So we get fragments back, and this is also called progressive enhancement, so we can just exchange parts. That means HTMX is not related to Thymeleaf or to Spring Boot or to Java. This can be used in any application that is using server-side rendering to enhance or to add some dynamic information or dynamic behavior. Also, the same is implemented for the scrolling. So we see here just the persons that we have, and if I scroll down, you see that it reloads the other persons. And this is also done with htmx. Maybe we can have a look at this as well. This is a bit more complicated because we have here multiple AX tags. We have a get that's used for paging. Here we see that we pass the size and also the page to the backend. Then we have a trigger. The trigger is if the last row is hit, then we do that. And then we have a swap attribute that will add the last row to the table itself. So we can do the same with htmx, so we can use this paging. Now you've seen that we have three choices as Java developers what we could use, and now the question is, in which cases do we use those options? In my opinion, Vaadin is very useful if you're developing data-centric business applications. So if you have a lot of grids and you have forms, you have dashboards, you have charts, you have these classic business applications where you usually have a lot of forms, a lot of grids, only a few users. The applications are mostly used in the back office, like an ERP system or a CRM system, and you don't have customer-facing applications. And if you only want to use Java, then Vaadin is the go-to solution for that. By the way, you can also create mobile applications or mobile-first applications, let's call it. I'm currently working on a project where we create a progressive web application with Vaadin, with push functionality and stuff like that, entirely in Java. On the other hand, we have Hilla. So if you need a lot of client interaction or you want to have offline capable applications, or if you want to use a lot of the browser APIs that are provided, then you can go with Hilla. As I said, you can also mix Hilla and Vaadin to create a hybrid application. And Hilla is also very suitable if you have front-end developers in your team or other full-stack developers that already know JavaScript or TypeScript, React, or Lit, and then they can use their knowledge to build applications more easily because you don't have to think about the REST API, you don't have separate validation, and you also have just one build process. And finally, Thymeleaf. If you want to have full control over the HTML, for example, if you want to do search engine optimization, or if you have more like a customer-facing website style application, then you can go with that approach. htmx will allow you to get some dynamic parts in the application. You can also take full advantage of server-side rendering because there's no JavaScript involved. You don't have to write any JavaScript, just use htmx. And you also can cache these sites very, very easily. So that's it from my side. You can find the code on github.com/simas.ch. That's my GitHub account, and full stack is the project. Just download it from there, and then you can try it yourself. If you like to get in touch, I have a website with a blog. It's called martinelli.ch. You find my email address also there, and I have a Twitter account, simas_ch, where you also can get in touch. And now I'm open to questions if you have some.
Simon, thank you so much for this session. And I found it very, very interesting. I mean, even when I come from a C# or a .NET area, to just see where Java is going. And what I really liked about your presentation was that you gave three different options and then let people decide where you are in whichever enterprise application you're supporting, and then give them the option to even plug and play and even have hybrid options between the three. So I think that's a very interesting place to be. um, I'm just going to just a minute, let me just jump over to the Pine and see if there are any Q&A coming here. It does not look like that, but good. So it looks like I think more people might just ping you during the course of the conference, or using your contact, just drop a question later. For me, I just found it very interesting. And where do you think, you know, there's something interesting, because when I now get into teams, I support teams as a technical project manager, and there are some teams which, when they're newly building up, they pick up an entire stack. And new teams which tend to pick up stacks, they tend to pick up React or Angular. And new teams which have been established for a longer time seem to have either a .NET platform or a Java platform, which they build on. Where do you think this is going? I mean,
Yeah, it's very interesting. There is something called CV-driven development. Maybe you heard about that. So the idea is you go to conference, you read like a blog post, or you are on a whatever meetup, for example, and you hear about new technology. So developers tend to want to use that technology because they think they only stay relevant if they use that technology that is hype at the moment. So that may be true, but this is kind of the cause of the problem, right? So I would say if you want to build application, and I'm building application for 30 years already, then you must think for the future. Because when I started as a developer, people say, yeah, you build an application, it will stay for 2 to 3 years, then we will replace it. But you know yourself, this never happens. So applications
no,
will
no, no.
stay
I mean,
very long.
the prototype that you wrote is still running in production for the next 3 to 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a point because if you're using like a new or if you're using frameworks in the JavaScript space, they tend to change. So I was also in charge of an application that we built back in the days with Angular.js, and they moved to Angular, and this was
Oh,
completely different framework, and so they had an issue to migrate from one framework to another. And if you can stay like in a single ecosystem or do things very simple, then you are also able to move to something else. But
mm,
if you're going full in with the framework, then you will stuck there and you can't move out of that. I mean, Angular as example, we used to have reactive stores, for example, on the client side, but now we have signals. So signals are everywhere. And what do we do now? Now we have legacy reactive stores, and how do we move to signals? Should we move to signals? And if we can stay on a framework that is more stable, and by the way, you mentioned .NET, I like Blazor and stuff like that. That's very interesting technology as well. Uh, Kind of similar but different, right?
yeah.
Like Vaadin. And such frameworks are much easier to use if you're a full stack developer or if you must use or create back office business application, stuff like that. And you really should think about using the right tool for the right job. But this requires the developers that they know more of the frameworks, and that's why I'm doing these talks to give them an idea that there are other frameworks that they could use instead of all the
No,
obvious
that,
choices.
I mean, it's also very interesting to notice, because there are some projects where I was involved in where they said, "Oh, are you from C Sharp .NET? Oh, then why don't you take care of the back end, and we let the other platforms take care of the front end?" And you're like, "Oh, that's interesting." I mean, as if you're like being demoted to the
Yeah,
back end.
exactly. There is maybe a last word about that. In my opinion, often people say, "Oh no, don't do full stack development, so you're jack of all trades, but not an expert of anything at the end," right? But that's not true. And you don't have to be that. Because if you're creating applications, it's much better if you implement one use cases from the front end to the back end because the code will be simpler at the end.
Yeah,
And if you're a team, you don't need to have experts. You need to have maybe a front end expert and a back end expert, but all the other team members can learn from them and they can help them. And you don't have to be an expert in one thing because you will never be an expert of everything, but you will get experts in the things that you're doing, no matter if it's full stack, if it's database, whatever. But during the project you will learn a lot, and in the next project you will be the expert. So it's a misconception that companies are trying to find experts. They should hire for potential, not for skills, because it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you have the potential, I can teach you C sharp tomorrow, right? If you don't have the
definitely.
potential, it doesn't matter.
Simon, I'm gonna quote you on that last line in the future. Thank you so much for this session, and looking forward to hearing from you more on LinkedIn and other platforms.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Matt. Have a
Bye.
great day. Bye.